Welcome to Ruby on Rails. If you are looking to go from hello world to IPO, you've come to just the right place. I'm going to build a simple application that shows you the basics of Ruby on Rails and how you put it into production. Let's go. We're going to start by running Rails new blog. To get the basic Rails skeleton, let's hop into that skeleton and then we're going to generate a scaffold for a post. That post is just going to have a title that's a string and a body that's a text. And as you can see here from what's being generated, we have everything that we need to set up a basic interface for that post scaffold. There is a migration that'll set things up in the database. There is a controller, there are views, there's a model, there's even testing stubs and a JSON API on top. So let's run that migration. And as you can see here, we created the posts in the main schema file. And now we're ready to have a look at the application that was generated here with the post scaffold. So let's jump into the post controller first. The controller is really what guides all the inbound actions you get into a Rails application. You'll have the user hitting /posts or /post new, and it gets routed into the post controller. All post controllers follow the same convention. There are 7 actions. You have index, show, new, edit, create, and update and destroy. So these form a basic setup for configuring everything that's needed for a resource to be exposed to the web. And if you scroll down here, you can see we have everything served in 2 flavors. We have both the HTML setup that'll render views directly, and then you have JSON that'll render for an API. And as you can see here, we're also setting up a new post for some of those actions that require that. We're going to find it straight off an ID passed in through the URL. And the post parameters are the ones we're using when we're creating and updating the application. If we jump into the post model, you'll see there's actually nothing here. Everything in the post model is made available through introspection. So a new post model will look at the schema for that table, and it will know that there is a title and there is a body, and we can access that title and that body directly through this post object. And as it descends from application record, we can run everything from updates and destroys and what have you. This is also where we're going to put our specific logic that's particular to this application beyond just the management of attributes. And then finally, we have the views that are being generated. If we hop in here and have a look at the index view, you can see this is where we will list all the posts that are in the system. And Rails uses ERB, which is essentially embedded Ruby. So you mix HTML with Ruby in line, and you can split out more complicated functions into helper methods. But otherwise, this is the clearest cut setup in Rails. That is the default for integrating HTML and Ruby. Now, if we hop over and start up our development server, you do that with just bin/dev. If we were running a Rails application that also had auxiliary watcher processes, such as one for ESBuild or for Tailwind, bin dev would start those as well. But this version of our Rails blog is just going to be built with all vanilla, no build setup. So we only need to start the Puma Ruby web server, and we can hop over into the browser and see here. This is the thing you're going to see when you start up a new Rails application. It'll tell you which version you're on, both for the Ruby version, the Rails version, and the Rack version. That's running on localhost 3000 as by default. But if we do /posts here, you'll see the scaffold interface that we generated. Now, this is the index action, the one we just looked at in the view and from the controller. But if we click the new, you see here we have a form for creating the new post with its title and its body. It's quite basic, to put it mildly right now. But all the actions are mapped out. This scaffold interface is not meant for shipping into production. It is meant to showing you how to build a Rails application with the basics, and then you make it look pretty, you make it look nice. But, oh yeah, let me show you real quick here. If you do /post.json, you're gonna get that automatic API as well. As I showed you in the controller, there are 2 different paths. You have HTML and you have JSON. You could also have added XML in there or another path. But by default, you just get these 2 different variants, the HTML and the JSON variant. Now, if we hop back into our editor here, I can add a little bit of styling to make this look slightly nicer than the very basic layout that you get with the scaffold by default. I like to use simple CSS. It is simply a individual file that's being included. I don't have to compile anything here. I'm just referencing it straight off their CDN. And if we save that and reload, you can see it just looks a little nicer. Now, Rails has a bunch of different ways you can do the CSS. There's also a path where you can use Tailwind. Lots of people like that for good reason. And there are a bunch of different options. All the major CSS frameworks are available, but by default, we ship with a no build, as I said. Intention and simple CSS just makes things look prettier without having to adorn anything with classes or what have you. Now, let me show you one of the first features here. If we do raise exception inside the index action, you will see that Rails provides some really nice interface for dealing with that exception, seeing exactly where it happened. If I'm reloading here, you can see the line it was raised on, the source code that's around it. You can see a full trace. And down here, we even have a console. So you can interact with the instance variables that have been set for this index action. Here's just @posts that's been made available. And you can help diagnose whatever issue that it is that you have. But let's remove that again, and then let's look at the console from another angle. Now, you can get the console, as I just showed you, when an exception is raised, but you can also get the console if you just run Rails console. Now you have access to your entire domain model. So if we find the first post that we created, we can update that post straight here from the console. If we hop back, you see title is now changed from CLI. This is exceptionally helpful for interacting with your domain model, updating things on the fly, and as you'll see later, updating things even once you've deployed this to production. Now, let's install something else here. Let's install Action Text. That is one of the frameworks that's part of Rails, but is not set up by default. But you can set it up by running Rails Action Text install. That's going to give you a WYSIWYG editor that's currently powered by Trix, the open source what you see is what you get editor made in JavaScript. And it also sets up active storage. Active storage is a way to deal with attachments and other files in your Rails application. When you run it through Action Text install, it'll automatically set up those active storage tables that we need. There is one for the blob, and then we have one for text here. We run migrations to set that up again, and now that we've run Action Text installed, it also added a couple of gems, so we need to restart our development server. I do that just by exiting out and then just running the server again. If we then hop into our post model, we can declare that that post model has rich text body. We're going to convert the plain text body that we had just a second ago to a rich text body that is accessible through the WYSIWYG editor and that accepts those active storage attachments and uploads. But before we can do that, let's change the text area we had in the form here for our new post to be a rich text area. That's basically all you have to change. And let's save that and hop back into creating a new post. As you can see here, there is now a full WYSIWYG interface for creating the body. It comes with a default set of styles for the toolbar. You can change those. Those styles are generated straight into your application, so you can make it look nice for yourself. Let's give some bold and italic text here. You see, that was all that was needed. But I think what's even nicer to look at here is if we do an upload and we add a file, you will see that that file gets added with a preview directly to the WYSIWYG editor. And if we save that, we update the post, it is added to the post itself. And that then went through the whole process of doing a direct upload of the file when we dropped it into the editor. That uploads it straight to active text, or to active storage, excuse me. And then we have access to that and rendering it directly from whatever storage backend active storage is using. In this example, we're just storing on disk, but you could be storing your active storage in S3 or another object storage. Now, let's add a bit of custom JavaScript. Rails by default ships with Hotwire. Hotwire gives you Turbo, which is a way of accelerating page changes and updates so that your application will feel as fast and as smooth as a single page application without you basically having to write any JavaScript at all. And then there's the Stimulus framework for creating that additional functionality that you might need in a really simple way. You can have a look at hotwire.dev to see more about that. But what we're going to add here is a little piece of JavaScript to just add some additional functionality, pulling something in from npm. So we can do that using the import map pin command. And as you see, now that I hop back into our config import map, we've added the local text pin at the bottom, version 302. It pulled that straight off npm. It downloaded that as a vendored dependency that we can check into our version control system. And now we don't have any runtime dependency whatsoever on npm or anything else like that. You don't need anything beyond what Rails ship you with already, because Rails 8 is all no build by default. That means there's not a transpiler. That means there's not a bundler. These files are shipped directly to the browser over HTTP2, so it's nice and fast. And the import map is what allows us to refer to these files by their logical names while still doing far future digesting, such that they load really quick and such that they're easily compatible with CDNs and all that good stuff. But now that we've added that, let's have a look at our application JS file. That's the default setup that you have that the scaffold is going to use. And as you can see, we're using Turbo Rails. So we're including all the stimulus controllers if we have any. We're including tricks and action text to give the WYSIWYG. And now we're going to add that local text package as well. And we're going to start local time here. And in the local time, we're going to use it, and we're going to use it for adding the updated at timestamp here. And as you can see here, we're just adding a time tag, that's just a vanilla HTML tag, that has a data local time. That's what activates the local time JavaScript setup, and we will give it a format for what it should do with that UTC timestamp and turning it into a local time that we can have a look at. So if I reload here, you see it is November 13th by the time of my recording at 3:28 p.m. in my local time zone. But actually underneath, the time tag is going to be in UTC. That means we can cache this, and anyone around the world will still get the time displayed in their local time. Just a nice feature, but really what's unique here for Rails is the fact that we're using no build by default. So if I go over here in the inspector and look at the JavaScript files that are included, you can see we have the application.js file with a little digest stamp on there. If we change anything in that application.js file, the digest is going to change and the browser will re-download just that part. But everything else, Turbo and Stimulus, if they're not changing, we're not re-downloading that. That is why no build is such an efficient way of dealing with caching. But we can also have a look at a specific file. You'll see it matches exactly what we have back there. That's not a development setup. That is what we're shipping in production. There is no minification, there's no transpilation, there's none of that nonsense because you just don't need it. We're gzipping or broadlying this stuff so that it transports really quickly, but we're allowing you to view source on an entire application. If you look at something like hey.com, you'll see this technique in use on a major application, and you can view all of the JavaScript that we use to build that application, and that's the default for Rails. Now again, if you don't want any of this stuff, there is a way using JS Bundler -Rails to set things up in a more traditional way using ES-Build and what have you, but this is a wonderful way of developing modern web applications. All right, now let's add some comments to our blogging system. And I'm going to use a different generator here. I'm going to use a resource generator that is a little lighter than the one we were using for Scaffold. It doesn't generate a bunch of views and doesn't generate all sorts of actions in the controller by default. But it does generate the new model that we need, the comment model. It generates a migration for that, create comments, and it generates just some empty placeholders for the comments controller and for the view action. So let's run the migration for that. That sets up the comments table. You can see here the schema that we've now built up. We've added a number of tables for action text and action storage. And then we have added comments table. That's as you see here, as we had it in the migration where we were just referencing the post as a foreign key. And then we had the content as text. And then Rails by default also adds 2 timestamps that it keeps track of by itself, created at and updated at. And below that, you had the post that we added originally. All right, if we hop into that comments controller, it was empty. As you can see there, I'm going to paste something in that actually makes this stuff work. You'll see one principle of the controller setup we have is that we have these callbacks. Before action, we're going to set post. So before all the actions, we're going to reflect the fact that this is a nested resource. The comments is something that belongs to a post, and we will pull out the post ID from the params. That's what's being parsed in as part of the URL, and we will fetch that post, and now we will create the comments associated with that post based on the parameters that are expected as comment content. And then after it's created, we will redirect back to the post. So let's actually also create the other direction of this association. You saw a comment belongs to a post, but then we're also going to make the post has many comments. Now we have a bidirectional association that we can work with in both ways. Now, we're also going to add a number of partials here. This is the templating system, basically a subroutine that you can refer to. There's going to be 3 of them. There's going to be the comments that includes the entire comment section. We're going to reference that in our post show in just a second. And within that, we're going to refer to another partial for an individual comment and another partial again for the new setup. So let's paste some of that in here. You can see this is for the entire collection. It just has an H2 for the comments, and we render the post comments. This again uses Rails's convention over configuration approach. It'll automatically know that the comment model should map to views/comment/comment, so it can look up the right partial file to use. And then below that, we have the form that we're referencing with the comments new. So let's hop in and paste in the individual comment. As you can see here, we just give it a div that has a DOM ID so that we can reference it. We're pasting in the comment, and we're using that same time tag as we were using with the post, but this time we are going to use time ago, so we get that nice 2 minutes ago on when something was posted, rather than a local time spelled out with AM/PM setup. And then finally, let's paste in the form that we're going to use. That form is going off a model, the new comment, but it's nested underneath the post so that we automatically can deduce which URL that we should post this new form to. And your comment is just going to be a text area for content. We could have made this a rich text field as well, but let's keep things simple and just keep it in plain text. Now that we have that set up, we can hop in and hook it all up into the show action for the posts. That's going to reference that comments that includes both the comments and the new form. All right, let's save that and hop back into our browser. Oh, I made a mistake here. When we generated the resource, it added a route for the new comments, but that route was not nested by default. We actually need to go into our routes.rb and then see here that resource we added needs to be nested. When it is nested, we get the fact that it's going to be /posts/1/comments, and we have the association set up nicely. Now let's reload. Now it works. We have our comments field underneath. We can add the first comment. And as you can see here, this is my first comment a second ago. That was the local time doing its time ago conversion. Now let's set things up to be dynamic, such that when we add a new comment to one of these, it's going to update the other as well. This is how we use WebSockets in Rails using Action Cable, one of the frameworks that we have, to create updates that are distributed automatically without folks having to reload their browser. So if we scroll down to the bottom here, we're ready. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a turbo stream from post to the show files, to the show template. That's going to set up the WebSocket connection and subscribe us to a channel named after that particular post that's pasted in. And if we hop into our comment, we can set up a broadcast to for that post. The broadcast to will broadcast all updates made to that comment, whether a new comment is updated or an existing comment is changed in some way or even one deleted, and send it back out to a channel on Action Cable named after the post association that this comment belongs to. And that is basically it. Now, if I go over here and I add a comment to one of these, you see the comment was added on the left immediately at the same time. That's all WebSockets automatically happening through Action Cable. We can do it, of course, the other way as well. All right, that is very neat. Now let's go to production, because of course you're not just here to create a Hello World app that runs on your own machine. You want to get this out into the world, and Rails 8 and forward ships with Kamal, a simple tool for deploying your web application anywhere. And there's a default configuration file in config/deploy.yaml that we can use. It's pre-filled a little bit. It has the service name of the name of your action, but we need to rename, for example, your user, the name of the image, to go to my name of where I store this on Docker Hub. You can see we changed that down in the registry as well, and the name of the container image. Now I'm going to deploy this on my own little Hoppy server. And that Hoppy server is currently wiped. It is completely clean and Ubuntu 24.04 setup that has nothing on it already. This is part of the magic of Kamal. You can spin up a new VM anywhere in the cloud or use your own hardware and point Kamal straight to it, and you'll be going in no time. So this server exists on this address, demo@exitsoftware.io, and I will then fill out the host as a CNAME to that machine, but we're using alpha here. If I had deployed another application called Bravo to the same server, Kamal would set it up such that it can host 2 applications or any number of applications on that same server. Now, we will also need to have a look at the secrets here. That is in .kamal/secrets, because the register that I'm using, that is Docker Hub, needs, of course, a password. It is using my username, but it also needs a password. And you can pull that password from a bunch of different places. You can pull it from a credential store like 1Password. You can pull it straight out of a GitHub command, as you can see here with the GitHub token above, or you can pull things out of ENV. I'm pulling it out of ENV with my Kamal registry password that I've already set up on my personal bash, and then the Rails master key that does the decoding of any credentials we've set for Rails is just using a cat straight out of the config master key. You'll need to change that if you're working with other people, of course, because you don't want to check that master key into your Git repository. You're going to want to pull that out of 1Password when you go for real. But this is all we basically need. We are now ready to check in the entire project into Git. Kamal uses Git for keeping track of versions, and we can now run Kamal setup. And I'll connect to that remote server, and it'll install Docker if it's missing. It'll build the Docker file or the Docker container off the Docker file that Rails shipped with by default. There's nothing you need to set up there. And it will deploy it, push it out, do it in a red-green deployment or blue-green deployment such that there is no gap in that deployment as you set things up. And as you can see here, I sped things up a little bit, but it was about 80 seconds on my Linux machine from a cold boot to do that. Now, we can hop back in here and go to alpha-exitsoftware.io and see, whoops, there was a 404 here. That's because if we go back to our routes file, I have not defined root. And in production, you're not going to get that screen we saw with the Rails version and the Ruby version. That is only for development. So in production, you actually need to manually specify the root. So we can go down here and uncomment this. That sets what the root route is going to be. We're just going to point it to posts.index. We can save that. Check in that save change, and then we can run Kamal deploy again. And that's basically the rhythm you will be in when you're working on a Rails application and you're deploying to production. If we go back here and reload, now in production, boom, we are live in production with our whole setup. Everything is working. We can upload the active storage files directly to it. By default, Kamal will use a Docker volume to store these things up, but of course you can configure that. And as I said, you can use S3 if you like as well. Comment system is of course there as well. Let's add one of those comments. And now we have the entire application running in production. Wasn't that easy? Now let's add authentication to things as well. Authentication is one of the newer features in Rails. It basically gives you a default setup for tracking sessions, tracking passwords, and even doing password resets. What it does not give you is a sign-up flow, because that's usually quite specific to a given application. So we leave that as an exercise for the reader. But as you can see here, it adds a handful of migrations, one for users and one for sessions. So we're going to run Rails DB migrate again. And then we are going to hop in here and have a look at what was actually generated. We have the sessions controller. That's probably the most important. You can see here it allows unauthenticated access to just new and create. Everything else by default will be behind the authentication lock. There's also a rate limit to make sure that people don't bombard you with attempts to log into users they don't have access to. And then we do the authentication using the email address and passwords and start a new session from there. If we hop to the session, you can see it just is very basic Rails active record. Now what we're going to set up is we're going to set up a default user that the system should have as we're working with it to allow us to log in, since we don't have that sign up flow. So that's just going to be my email address and a 123 password. We can hop back into our CLI and run Rails DB seed. That's going to run that file I just showed you and set things up. Now if we hop back onto localhost and we try to log in with first the wrong password, we're actually going to see something here. When I added the authentication, it added another gem. It added BC Crypt. That's what we're using to keep passwords secure. So we have to hop back in here and restart our development server. As we added a new dependency, we can hop back in, reload, and now we're good to go here. As you can see, I first tried to put in a wrong password. We're going to get this screen, try another email address or password. But if I log in with 123, boom, I'm in. Now let's add a way to sign out to the main layout here. We can add that with a button to sign out. It's going to hit the session path, and it's going to use a method of delete to delete that session if we're authenticated, as you can see there. So it's not going to show that button if we're not already authenticated, which is good because this layout is also used for login. All right, let's save that and hop back and see a reload here. Now we have a sign out button, and we can sign out, and that's all as it should be. Let's deploy this to production. We're gonna just check this thing into Git, deploy it straight to production, go back to our alpha software, boom, DHH123. Oops. That didn't work. Why did that not work? Because we had not run our DB seeds. Now, I could run DB seeds in production, but let me show you another way of doing it. Kamal also gives you a way to start a console on the server side that is just like the console I showed you earlier that ran in development. You can see here, it reminds you that you are in production. So be careful when you create things. They're going to be created on the server side in your real database. The database, by the way, we haven't talked much about that, and that is because we're using SQLite. So there is nothing to configure. There's nothing to set up. SQLite is now a suitable database for production. With Rails, we have tuned it with all the right pragmas and everything that you need to run SQLite well in production. You, of course, still need to set up a way to back that up, but everything else is pre-configured for you. So now we created that user in production using our Kamal console. I can log in with that user, 123, and boom, we are in with production authentication for the entire system. All right, one last thing. Let me show you how to turn this web application into a PWA as well. We're going to create a link reference here to a manifest. That manifest just exists here as a comment that you can reference. We're going to turn the manifest on in our routes file as well. There are basically two lines here, as you can see. There's a manifest and there's a service worker that you can use for your PWA. We'll turn those on, and I'll show you the manifest first. The manifest is just really basic. It's going to show the name of the PWA you're going to be using, and it's going to refer to an icon. By default, we just have a nice red dot, but you should obviously replace that with your application icon. And if I hop in and have a look at the service worker, it is sort of already set up for doing web push. Just as an example here, having some listeners, you can tweak that as you see fit. We're not going to change that for this little example, but Now let's check in that PWA files and then let's deploy to production one more time. And as you can see, look in the top right corner. When I reloaded, we now have that little install icon in Chrome. And if I click that little install icon, I'm going to get this prompt and boom, I have a PWA running in production for my Rails application. So that is a very quick tour of Rails. This is a wonderful way of getting started, just to use those scaffold generators and the authentication generators to get something going, get a hello world out there, start working on your application, and before you know it, you might just be taking your application all the way from hello world to IPO.